like to start here and assemble. We don't really claim to be material experts, but we do see our role as bringing them together and other professionals to create an environment where we can kind of create the best work possible. And I think the dimension that Assemble adds to the panel today is a kind of a model of organisation that kind of across art, design, architecture, construction, also workspace. Kind of at the core is collaboration, which is what I'd like to talk about today. And so across many scales, central to a lot of Assemble's projects have been hands-on making, whether at the start, sort of delivering buildings by physically hand-making them, or objects within buildings, or more recently, depending on or kind of learning to have a sensitivity to design through engaging with material experts. And this relationship to sort of makers and the provenance of materials, we think is like really central to delivering projects using natural building techniques. So this is us looking all quite serious. This was the most recent photo at the end of last year in our temporary installation in King's Cross, Fleeting Forest, and those trees kind of came to the site and then moved on to a more permanent park, one of our projects, Bramcote Park in South London. But this is how we look most days, sort of in our sparse yard that we're still moving into, eating lunch together, something we do kind of every day. And as the group changes and shifts, the members, kind of new members come in and old members leave, Assemble and kind of the organisation shifts a lot as well. So this is how Assemble was presented to me when I first joined. This sort of quite hectic, complex nature of people with multiple skills and backgrounds, some untrained architects, some fully qualified. Jane has a PhD and writes books. Louis studied history and politics but runs the workspace branch of Assemble. So there are kind of lots of different members, and whoever's there at the time kind of establishes their kind of corner. So Assemble started as a CIC when they kind of established themselves back in 2010, and then more recently have kind of changed, become a limited liability partnership with two main branches. Assemble Design Limited is the design studio, and then Sugar House Studios is the workspace branch, but we all sit under the same house. And so I joined about 5 years ago, but now this is kind of closer to what the structure of Assemble is. So when you kind of join, you join as an employee, and after 2 years, 2 years full-time, you can become a partner. And a partner means you have a stake in the business and a vote at the sort of quarterly, monthly meetings, and a say in sort of more business decisions. But partners wear multiple hats. You can be a member of the design studio, part of the management team, and sort of leading the workspace team as well, which is, I guess, one of Louis' multiple hats. In terms of the structure, we have a number of collective meetings aside from project work. So on Monday mornings, we have the go around and new work. So when new work opportunities come in, everyone gets sort of a chance, whether it's 15 or 20 of us in the room, to sort of say something if they'd like to about a project that comes in. And sort of more recently, just in like the last month or so, trying to sort of establish rules for ethical decision making, because there can be sort of projects that come in that conflict with some of our aims. So we're always trying to like establish or refresh like the way we procure work. And then we have Pan Assemble, which is a slot on a Wednesday morning where you can choose to hold a collaborative session for a project that you're working on and invite the wider practice. And then Management Hour, where sort of decisions related to businesses, or if individuals have any questions they'd like to put forward to Assemble, they get discussed and then relayed. And then QMM, which is quite like an arduous long day of reviewing accounts and the essential things that gets sort of 18 to 20 people paid each month. And then the summit is once a year. We manage to sort of try and get out of London and discuss sort of the bigger ideas of Assemble and where we're moving forward. But definitely the most important meeting that happens every day is lunch, like 100%. And we take a lot of pride in sort of setting the table and holding this informal place for discussion. So each day a different person cooks, there's a rota system, and kind of on the surface doesn't make much financial sense, but kind of it gives an opportunity for people to get to know each other so that, for example, you have an issue with CAD during the day, you feel comfortable speaking to someone else in the office and saving 20 minutes of your time. So this thing that doesn't necessarily make financial sense on paper really reflects well in the day-to-day running of the business. And we've had a lot of future collaborators come to lunch. And yeah, if anyone's ever in London or fancy popping by, do come by, bring dessert. This is Jamie's famous dal. Non-humans are welcome. We have competitions. We go big at Summit. And so Assemble is kind of founded on this idea of collaborative making, both food, but also by initially sort of making buildings together. And this is the Cineroleum, which was initially funded by a kind of a £2,500 arts fund grant. And Assemble first came together for this single self-built project, turning sort of a disused petrol station into a temporary cinema, scaffold boards turned into seatings, and using Tyvek membrane to make this sort of curtain to hold performances that would go up and down. And sort of similar projects followed, such as Folly for a Flyover, commissioned by Create London in collaboration with the Barbican, an event space, and Theatre on the Fly next to the Chichester Festival Theatre to hold sort of events to mark their anniversary. And these early projects were all run on sort of the sort of volunteers. For example, this was sort of 16 to 65-year-olds all helping out to sort of create this building. And alongside this, Assemble started to establish more permanent bases. So in Stratford, in East London, a grant from the London Legacy Development Corporation helped to establish this permanent base on an industrial site in East London, creating a more permanent workspace and workshops for sort of other tenants. So this was the first time Assemble tried to sort of create an affordable workspace model, or a kind of makerspace. Sort of 10 years ago was like less heard of in London. And it also gave them the space to create one-to-one mock-ups for larger buildings. Here you can see a corner of the Goldsmiths building facade, which was tested out and delivered as a client design portion, along with the chairs. So kind of this permanent space allowed sort of temporary projects to grow into more permanent, complex projects as well, whilst also kind of next door building a new kind of build barn and developing the tiles. And so that was on a Meanwhile site in London. A lot of Assemble's homes have happened. We're on our third now. Happened on Meanwhile sites. So then that unfortunately got developed, and so we moved into Bermondsey, which is where I first came to Assemble, at an old school with this huge swimming pool, an amazing kind of existing structure. And so this was infilled in a similar vein and provided space. So sort of this timber structure was built, and then the tenants infilled the partitions, and the rent was at a reduced cost, and provided sort of wood workshop facilities. And there was also a metal worker, ceramicist, our architecture studio and model space, and a small courtyard where we would all meet and cross over, along with the kitchen as well. And front of house, really key space, flexible space for exhibitions, storage of items, photographing models, and a cabin was made in there at one point by one of the furniture makers. Lots of storage and parties. Eventually got knocked down. Cool. And then, so we moved to Leaside Yard very recently. And we're still sort of moving in to this space. Again, sort of creating workshops with the wood, with all the equipment that we bought to the new studio. And I guess one of the fundamental reasons that we try to sort of deliver sites where we can work on is so that we can establish and maintain these relationships with the tenants on site. This is Inez delivering our table through a window. But this is Steve, who came to Stratford and then to Bermondsey and now to Bow, he's a joiner who's been with Assemble for a really long time and has kind of become like a friend and a collaborator of us, and is kind of forming these long-term relationships where you have a real connection to the sort of experts in their craft. Has been really useful for different projects, such as sort of this table at Assemble that we really needed a new table. There was an 8x4 plank plywood which wasn't big enough, so I wanted to make this bigger table out of reclaimed plywood, over reclaimed pine. So I sort of denailed it and planed it, thicknessed it, and Steve helped me sort of on the spindle, and then glued up on a Friday night. This was me at 1 a.m. on a Saturday. And eventually, it becomes now the table where 20 people sit round every day, sort of made in collaboration with Steve. And that's not sort of a rare project to happen. The sort of pot you can see on the table was also, we made a whole load of bowls last summer for an exhibition that came with us, and now we eat out the bowls every day. And they were fired in Collective Matter, another tenant, ceramicist tenant in Bermondsey. And then you can see the lunch rota on the left. We're still working on our lunch spot. So as well as sort of collaborating internally and doing little projects, we also do quite major or substantial projects with our own tenants. So this is the Blue, a public square in Bermondsey, and it was funded by the Greater London Authority. It was a complete sort of Bermondsey collaboration from the tenants to the public. So Takeshi Hayatsu Architects were the main architects along with us on the project. Stinson Squeeze, graphic designers, and Martha McGuinn did the metalwork, also tenants. Will Floyd McLean did these beautiful oak structures, and Emma Leslie did the oak benches. And then also Granby did this fountain in the middle, who aren't a tenant, but a community ceramics workshop based in Liverpool, but they were founded by Assemble. And so Assemble first sort of engaged with the community of Granby back in 2014. And Granby is sort of this quite run down, but originally racially and ethnically diverse community in Liverpool. And there's a major regeneration project still going on, sort of 10, 15 years later. But in 2011, the residents of Granby formed Granby Four Streets Community Land Trust. And this kind of involved renovating 10 existing buildings there as sort of this pilot project along a street. And so workshops have set up in the existing derelict houses to create different ceramics products. And these sort of, along with quite a sort of rudimentary retrofit, formed really special moments within the project, sort of mantelpieces, fireplaces, doorknobs, along with sort of, the bigger refurbishments, such as the Winter Garden, which is an infield terrace house. And so these individual elements that the community made with the help of Assemble formed this exhibition, which was the entry for the Turner Prize. And the winnings from the Turner Prize essentially formed Granby Workshop, which is still running today. And so the project that initially started off as the renovation of 10 houses was approached in a way that was not necessarily an architecture project, but just focused on who is around and who kind of wants to make these kind of individual bespoke elements. And the biggest thing that came out of this architecture project was a new organisation, which is now sort of separate to Assemble. And the guy who started it, Lewis, now lives in Liverpool, started a family, runs Granby Workshop. And for the remaining time, I'd really like to talk about a project in France, which kind of builds on this idea of kind of cross-collaboration. And it's for the Atelier Luma in Arles, in the south of France. And Atelier Luma is part of the Luma Foundation, and it's a biomaterials lab which uses the sort of theoretical framework of bioregionalism to produce bio-based materials. It's kind of at quite a small scale. And so Assemble were asked to submit an expression of interest, and so were BC Architects and Materials from Brussels, both sort of asked to express interest. And both parties asked if we could kind of collaborate together, because I think Assemble were already really interested in BC. And so I joined the project about 5 years ago, and it became this sort of amalgamation of these three entities working on this project in France. So this was their existing space. kind of this just big open plan space where everyone was making. And this was the new building, sort of halfway through the demolition, this old, really heavy stone building, old train depot. And so the roots of the Atelier Luma is all about engaging within the local landscape to understand what are the materials and industries that are really specific to that region. And sort of the roots of bioregionalism go back sort of to the late 1800s. This map by Frederick Topolis shows the UK split into different watersheds. So it's an idea of, so it's an environmental planning framework is what it was first sort of established as. Instead of having really hard legislative boundaries of counties, you're really understanding a place, a country, as different regions that are based on their environmental and cultural sort of assets. And you can understand a place, this is PhD research by Jonathan Ball, you can understand a place by the different values, kind of breaking it down to what is important about the specifics of that place. And so, yeah, in that PhD, this just shows a few different types of mapping those values and how you might understand a region differently to how you might see it on an ordinary map. And so cartography and mapping was really the starting point for interpreting this sort of this environmental planning approach, this kind of concept into reality. So here you can see the different quarries around Arles in Le Camargue, which was the region, and understanding where we might go to and who we might collaborate with. So you can also see the workshops and studios, institution buildings, and also the land was mapped as well. So different places. So this kind of bridges the theoretical framework to like what you're actually going to do on the ground. And so maps along with spreadsheets, which we all know are really important to running business, became really key places of documenting how we would approach this project in a way that wasn't using global supply chains, but really focusing on local industries and materials from the land. So for example, this is, there was sort of geo-based and bio-based materials that we were sort of looking at. So this is a silty clay from Valleybricks quarry, which is as a result, which is the waste product obtained from the washing of crushed silicate stones, and some kind of golden limestone offcuts from dimensional cutting, all within the region, like lots of limestone, but different, obviously different types of limestone. Here, a kind of a really white, soft dust and crushed stone was kind of obtained with no presence of clays at Sarragon quarry. Recycled aggregate, demolition aggregate, sunflowers. This is like where Van Gogh did all his paintings. So there's a big sunflower industry, but obviously the husk or the stalk of the plant is a waste product of the sunflower industry, along with the stalk and core, and then rice straw as well. So these kind of formed, and also the kind of existing mining of the site. So the existing clay tiles also had to be removed from the building. So these sort of materials from the region formed the palette of resources that at first, were brought to the site and residencies were held. So Assemble from London and BC from Brussels travelled down to Luma in France to hold the series of residencies with the Atelier Luma and the contractor who was working on site there to produce incrementally these different products, along with spatially organising the building, creating scale models and drawings, and then presenting these back to the client, to the people that would eventually inhabit the building. But yeah, these reports you can trace from the raw materials through to early experiments how the project came about. So documentation and such a key tool for just a record and engaging with others who might make it. Rammed Earth sort of experiments developed over time, sort of understanding, what the qualities of the rammed earth needed to be, what color it needed to be, whether we needed sort of more cohesion or cellulose on the outside to sort of seal it, if we could get really sharp edges, which is one of the successes of the material experiments, and then testing it. So like I say, we're not material experts, but working alongside those people and collaborating with them to design great spaces is key. And then that level up from making the small prototypes to making one-to-one components, and this is sort of the scale where you can sort of understand the space, how it connects to other elements of the building, such as the lintel and the flooring. And then it eventually sort of grows on site. And yet the same process can be seen for plasters. It's the same thing for every sort of material experimentation path, using sort of similar but different raw materials from the region. This is like a really quite limited palette to create different components. And here, kind of creating an algae paint, which was sort of algae, linseed oil, spirulina, create this blue, and working with BC, the experts there, to sort of create these small-scale on-site industrial processes, and obviously the plaster combining with the rice straw from the region and understanding, what works best, and then eventually applying it. And yeah, the same thing for timber, experimenting with small-scale mock-ups before committing to the full-scale thing. And these sort of different components can really be understood as materials within a network. So you can see sort of the different sort of elements that break down into the structural or more bigger components. And this is maybe the most important slide, is that you can trace those construction components back to the region. So it's going from what's the framework we're going to work in, what are the industries we're going to connect to and drive to in the region. Then you make it, and then you sort of reflect on this idea of what does that mean on the bigger scale for kind of creating a local economy around regional-based materials. And so this kind of idea of using the map as a tool to sort of communicate these ideas, I think is a really key method designers and architects can use. And then the final building opened last May, sort of a more permanent sort of round earth space, a cleaner exhibition space, studios with these compressed sunflower panels, the acoustic clay plaster in the background, and then sort of, these studio spaces with these timber walkways. And so extending on from the Atelier Luma project, Luma BC collaborated recently on a further project in Korea, where we were looking at using the same approach for a project in Gwangju, in South Korea, and really looking at sort of using oysters and sort of understanding the bioregion in a much different context, which is more of a sort of a seascape, and sort of understanding how we can create lime from oyster shells rather than extracting from quarries. And so creating lime plasters internally and oyster lime bricks with BC's expertise, and eventually kind of creating the exterior to this building with these new bricks that we made. And on reflection, those two last projects, Luma and Gwangju, there's sort of these two different approaches to the two different contexts that I think are really key, which is the site and the region. And beginning with the site, sort of asking the questions, what exists, what needs to stay, what needs to be removed, and what can be reused as the starting point, and just sort of limiting the scope to what is on site to create this narrative around, it's like powerful narrative of what is already there is the most important asset, and then slowly working out towards the region to engage with sort of the abundance of materials, sort of bio-based, geo-based, and reuse materials that are connected to the land and to those working on the land, and engaging with the provenance of those materials and looking close by automatically creates this shift in culture from sort of being blasé and specifying global materials to having a much different approach where you're caring about where these materials are coming from, the effect they have on the local ecologies and the people working those materials. And becoming, I think the important thing is creating construction and architecture projects that are kind of creating these localized networks of production and collaborating with people on the ground and crafting a built environment that is completely entwined with the natural environment as well of that place. Thank you very much.